Jumping straight into a massive historical lesson. We're looking at exactly what happens when absolute engineering hubris meets an unstoppable force of nature. Yep, we're talking about the tragic journey of the RMS Titanic. In this explainer, we're going to dig right into the actual mechanics of its design, that deadly chain of warnings that were just totally ignored, and the absolutely devastating reality of its final hours. So let's get right into it, because the lessons from this disaster, they're still incredibly relevant over a century later.
The greatest creations of mankind. Throughout history, we've constantly pushed the boundaries of what's actually possible, right? We build higher, we move faster, and we engineer these absolute marvels that just seem invincible. But there is a super fine, actually terrifying line between our human competence and the raw, unforgiving cower of nature. So what exactly happens when our ultimate masterpiece collides head-on with a completely indifferent world? Well, let's find out.
Okay, Section 1, Building the Unsinkable Ship. Let's dive right into this construction.
So picture this, the year's 1912. And to truly wrap our heads around the magnitude of this story, we've really got to grasp the sheer, unbelievable scale of the effort happening at the Harland and Wolff shipyard over in Belfast. Thousands of shipyard workers were just toiling away, day and night. They drove over 3 million heavy iron and steel rivets to build a vessel that was, honestly, way more than just a ship. It was essentially a floating monument to the dominance of the industrial age. The Titanic wasn't just, a way to get from point A to point B. It was literally the largest moving object ever built by human hands up to that point. Talk about an era of supreme confidence.
And that brings us to the word that totally defined its very existence: unsinkable. I mean, people genuinely believed it. And it wasn't just out of blind faith either. It was actually rooted in what was, at the time, cutting-edge engineering. The ship had these 16 massive watertight compartments. But here's where that fatal hubris kicks in. The builders calculated that the Titanic could supposedly stay completely afloat even with up to 4 of those compartments flooded. That single piece of math, that's what made the shipbuilders, the media, and the public truly, deeply believe they had somehow outsmarted the deadly perils of the sea.
Moving right along to Section 2, Luxury on the Ocean. Let's look at that maiden journey.
Now, what's really interesting about this is the sheer vibe on boarding day. The dock was just buzzing with anticipation, laughter, press cameras flashing everywhere as these incredibly wealthy passengers and hopeful families got ready to board. Because hidden inside this absolute steel behemoth was a level of opulence that was just unmatched. We are talking about first-class luxury rooms that could rival Europe's most exclusive hotels. Just to put that into perspective, a first-class parlor suite ticket costs the equivalent of tens of thousands of dollars in today's money. It's wild. Passengers were walking down these breathtaking grand staircases carved from rich woods, dining under sparkling chandeliers, and they even had a heated swimming pool and a Turkish bath on board. The whole shebang was carefully designed to make people completely forget they were floating on top of a wild, unpredictable ocean.
But as we move into Section 3, A Night of Ignored Warnings, things take a very dark turn.
As the sun went down, the temperature dropped like a rock, and the Titanic sailed deeper into the freezing waters of the North Atlantic. And what makes this whole tragedy so fascinating and frustrating is the actual mechanics of how it failed. It wasn't just bad luck. The ship was actually receiving crucial warnings about ice fields from other vessels in the area, like the Mesaba and the Californian. But the wireless operators on board, they were totally overwhelmed sending personal, luxury messages for the wealthy passengers. So those vital ice warnings were repeatedly ignored or just completely brushed aside so the ship could maintain its speed. It wasn't some sudden twist of fate. It was a compounding series of dismissed alerts. By the time the lookouts finally spotted that massive iceberg looming in the dark, well, the forward momentum of a ship that size was simply way too great to stop.
Which brings us to Section 4, Sinking into the Atlantic. The disaster unfolds. That grand illusion of being unsinkable, it shattered the exact moment those lower compartments were breached. Freezing water rushed in, alarms started ringing out, and this horrifying realization hit everyone. The ship was doomed. And to really understand the human cost here, we have to look at the deadly math of that night. The ship took 2 hours and 40 minutes to sink. As the deck drastically tilted, panic just spread like wildfire. And then the absolute terrifying reality of the lifeboats set in. There simply wasn't enough room. The Titanic only carried enough lifeboats for about half the people on board. The crew was frantically trying to maintain some kind of order, lowering these only partially filled boats into a lethal 28-degree Fahrenheit sea. It led to these absolutely devastating scenes of families having to say agonizing goodbyes right there on a freezing deck, completely isolated in the middle of the dark Atlantic.
And that brings us to our final part, Section 5, the Deep Ocean Legacy.
Today, the RMS Titanic rests in absolute silence, miles beneath the surface of the ocean. The rusted, decaying remains of a ship that was supposed to conquer the world, now just sitting quietly in the mud. It's a really haunting, ghostly sight, but it perfectly captures the core tension we're talking about in this explainer. Think about it. On one side, we have human pride, that unwavering, stubborn belief that